Election of chair, please. Can I have a proposer?
Chris Smoten.
Thank you. Got a proposal for Councillor Chris Smoten. Have we got a seconder? Yeah, and a vote.
We're voting chair.
Perfect. That's carried. That's the chair for Councillor Smoten then.
Aha, just when you thought you'd got rid of me. I return. All right, let's start with apologies. We got ones down on the paper from Councillor Pegg, who's substituted by Councillor Muddiman. Thank you. From Councillor Rowley, Ligo and Arshad. Is anybody aware of any other attendee apologies?
Yeah, Councillor Curry, so will be a couple of minutes late.
Councillor Caress running late, thank you. And we also have cabinet apologies. Councillor Brown would normally have presented the LGA peer challenge, but will be substituted by Councillor Turner. Councillor Railton would have been present for both the EV infrastructure and utilities reports, but Councillor Upton and Turner are in for them respectively.
Councillor Turner might be a little bit late, he's on a train.
Right, okay. His report is up first. Does that suggest reordering?
Not necessarily. If officers are happy to cover them, we can probably.
Okay, right, fine. We'll see how we go on that one. Right, item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody want to declare any interests on anything on the agenda? I don't see any. Fantastic. Chair's announcements. I won't make any announcements since my grip on power here is quite tenuous already. We have the item 5, the minutes. Does anybody have any comments they want to make, or any corrections regarding the minutes of the previous meeting? Again, not seeing any. Excellent. Right. I propose, if people are content, that we rejuggle the agenda slightly to get the smallest of the reports in front of us out of the way first, for the benefit of officers attending for that purpose. And so to talk about utilities first, then the LGA, then the electric vehicle infrastructure, and then finally to come onto our internal administration. People content that we do that? I see nods around the room, that's good. Fantastic. In that case, let's move straight on to utilities procurement. So, as noted, we had Councillor Turner, and we also have Mish present to speak on this one. And Ed has just appeared. Fantastic timing. Excellent. Ed, if you can hear us, do you want to start off? Would you like to hand over to Mish to start, since he's present in the room? How do you want to do this?
This is very much an away fixture because it's not so much my baby. So if Mish is happy to do it, but if there are any specific political questions on it or points of political feedback, then I will gladly take them on board, attempt to respond, and take them away, if that's all right.
Fantastic. In that case, Mish, please kick off.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is a paper which we brought periodically through the council process. The purchase of our utility services is clearly significant from a financial perspective, and unfortunately, given what's happened in the energy markets in recent times, it's more significant than perhaps hitherto. We have for many years used a public buying organisation to undertake the energy purchasing. And those are organisations which are essentially set up and allow us to bypass the rather complex process of actually having to do a full tender ourselves, let alone use one of the many agents that are out there in the marketplace. So we found it's been satisfactory, and using one of these organisations and buying our energy effectively under a contract over a sort of a long-ish period means that we can smooth what might otherwise be a very, very volatile market, so that you smooth your prices. What they effectively do is they go and they pre-buy into the market, they forward purchase energy, which, as I say, for delivery into the future, which smooth things. What we're seeking, hence, we have to also under the law, because we have a number of leaseholders who are in properties where there is energy that the council is procuring on their behalf. Usually in communal areas, it certainly won't be in their own homes, but it'll be, for example, in the hallways and so forth. Could be for a lift or something like that. We're paying the bill there. Under the law, if we're going to procure energy on their part, we must undertake a consultation. That consultation is currently underway and will close, I believe, on the 21st of October. We need to consider the responses from that consultation, take that into account in terms of making our decisions about how to go forward in terms of our procurement. But then as soon as we're able to do so, we can go into the market and make those arrangements with as we're advising here, a public buying organisation. That covers our gas and electricity needs, and we would be buying for a term of up to 4 years from October 24, which is when our current contracts expire. For water, it's a little bit different. We did a full market assessment on that a few years ago. And as a result of that, we struck a contract with Wave, which went from September 21 through till September 24. So it doesn't quite align with the energy, but not too far off. What we're recommending, given that we've been relatively recently to look at the water market, that it's been a relatively stable market, certainly compared with all the ups and downs we've seen in energy. We believe that the best value from the council's point of view is just simply to roll that on for another 2 years, because if we have to go into seek a new contract, then there'll be additional fees that would incur. So we avoid those fees by rolling it on when we've got a 2-year leeway in that. I think the sort of third element I want to highlight is that the way in which we're seeking to structure the contract, likely to structure the contract with a public buying organisation for energy, would be on a sort of 2 years plus 2 years basis, so that we have a potential break point. There's a reason for that, and a couple of reasons. Firstly, a significant amount of the energy that is used by sort of council assets, where we're the bill payer, is inevitably in our leisure estate. So for about 40% of both our gas and electricity is used to run our leisure centres. Of course, we're also going through a process of seeking a new leisure provider. We know from discussions with the bidders in that leisure competition that it is conceivable that some of those organisations may be able to procure more cheaply than we can in the market because of their scale. So it would be in our interests then to allow them to do the purchasing, hence creating a potential sort of window, a break clause in our own purchasing arrangements. The second thing is that we, and I'll have to maintain some commercial confidentiality, but we are in discussions with a local renewables generator around potentially a long-term energy contract, what's known as a power procurement agreement, a power purchase agreement. If we can do that, then we could potentially fix our price with typically a CPI type inflator for a long period of time in energy, up to 15 years or so. And again, that could be very beneficial to the council. And so we want to create for ourselves an opportunity if that opportunity arises for us, that we could switch into something like that. And we could potentially do both of those things, do some procurement ourselves on PPA and permit our leisure provider to procure. So hence the sort of 2-year break point. And then the last bit, which links to all of these things, is that we're also seeking to undertake a kind of a full review over the next 6 months of our energy, overall energy approach. We think that the scale of our energy purchasing needs now is such that we really ought to just check and see what's best practice around. And on that basis, that can also inform some of the decisions that we are making from 2 years out.
Thank you very much for the intro. Just before we move on to general questions, can you, you've already mentioned communal areas of HRA properties and leisure, where I was actually kind of expecting it to be Fusion that paid the bill, but apparently it's us that pays the bill. Exactly which buildings are in and out of scope here? So, like, for example, housing associations, would they pay the bill for their own communal areas, or do we pay that? Commercial property that we let out, I'm guessing that the tenant is the one who pays the bill in that instance. But yeah, what's in and out of scope for this?
I can't recall how many meter points the council has, energy meter points, but it's in the many thousands, many thousands. Everything from lampposts in car parks that we own. So there's a lot in scope. There may be some of our commercial tenants where, again, the building, they may not pay all of the energy consumed within the building. It may be that a bit of it is paid for by us. Certainly, as already identified, that's the case with many of our housing blocks. I'm not quite sure what the arrangements would be with housing associations that you asked, but if we own the building, that it is conceivable that part of the estate there might be subject to billing to the council.
Thank you. Okay, can I see hands from anybody who has questions or comments on utilities purchasing? I see Councillors Muddiman and Fry. Councillor Fry first, please.
Thank you. I mean, the one thing I wonder is when we enter into these, they're not very far forward contracts, but they're there. Are they they must be for fixed quantities, I assume. I mean, I'm just thinking things like with the leisure centres, we do have these renewable energy schemes that I believe are now working fully at our leisure centres. And it's a bit the question of, is it us or is it the leisure provider who does it? Just wonder, do we have some kind of option within these? Because do we have to commit to a certain quantity regardless of what we actually need? Or what kind of flexibility is there? Because we want to know the price, but equally we may not know the quantities.
So essentially, the provider wants, the energy provider wants to know what the estate is and wants to understand what the typical usage is. That is broadly sufficient. So you're absolutely right. We can't know. Nobody can know exactly how much energy will be required by these buildings because there's so many different factors, weather being one of them. But they'll fix their prices based on what their expectation is about usage, which is informed by prior usage. And with the heat pumps, as you referenced, they'll take that into account. So that there'll be an expectation about, increased energy demand in respect of some facilities with consequent reduced gas demand.
Just to follow up, I mean, I know it's impossible to know how much you'll need that far ahead, but does it mean, therefore, if you buy more than the base load for which you contract, is that just at the market price, maybe through the same provider, but it's at whatever the floating price would be for that excess? And equally, if we had a surplus, do we have to pay the difference, if you like, if we don't need it? Or
No, there aren't excesses. Once we've, I mean, unless there was, if we go into small print about sort of exceptional circumstances, but essentially, if the price is agreed for those sites, then the sites may consume more or less than had been forecast. We're not then having to pay penalties or to buy sort of on the open market. No.
Councillor Merriman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mish.
When we, as the council, authorise the public buying organisation to purchase electricity on our behalf, do we specify that must be green from renewable sources, so a green, a renewable tariff?
No, we don't. I mean, in quite actually the opposite. So you may be aware that we used to purchase green gas and green electricity on the advice of our scientific advisor. We made the decision, Professor Nick Eyre, we made the decision to reverse that. A decision was taken through Cabinet a year or two ago on that matter. And the rationale is straightforwardly that, in his view, the actual kind of the value of the revenues, the additional revenues that you pay for both green gas and green electricity does not translate sufficiently into the overall sort of decarbonisation of the energy infrastructure as it ought to, and it would be better to instead use the money you've saved there in a net zero transition fund, which we created, and that can be used for reducing our energy usage. So in short, don't buy what are effectively green products. Instead, use the additional funds that you would pay for that to reduce your consumption, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. You almost answered my second question, is are we doing that, and how much does that amount to, and what are we doing with it?
So last time I looked, the green gas is approximately was a saving of about £140,000 a year, which was going into the net zero transition fund. We're using it for a variety of things. For example, to undertake work to change lighting systems in our leisure centres, because at the moment you can't get, or in fact for a period now, you can't get government funding for lighting schemes. They're only interested in heat. So if we want to do works to reduce our energy consumption with lighting systems, then we have to sort of put the money in ourselves. And what it does is given there's a lot of demand for capital for myriad schemes, it means that we've got a pot, we can just use it and we can get on with it.
You've meant 140,000 for green gas. What about electricity?
I can't tell you off the top of my head what that amount is. I can come back to you. What I do know is that we've noticed that the price difference between kind of brown electricity, if you would call it that, and green electricity has widened over the past year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else got any questions or comments? I don't see any, so I have one more myself, which is, so in the report, you mention in particular the merit of bulk buying, essentially, and being able to get a somewhat better deal than people purchasing individually. Are we looking at all at expanding the number of people that we are essentially acting as a reseller for, in terms of, for example, bringing commercial tenants who are directly buying their own electricity into that fold? I'm thinking of two particular reasons. One, obviously, if we are able to get a better rate than they'd be able to get in isolation, then that suggests an ability for us to make some small margin on reselling to them. They'd get us slightly better rates than they would, and we'd reap some amount of profit on that. And I'm also thinking in particular about renewable hardware, in that in the situation where we are the reseller, that really changes the landscape as regards to our installing either installing things like solar, but also doing things like insulation that reduces the use of electricity at things like social rented homes. And that's because that would again enable us to take the financial yield from that and divide that between benefiting the tenant and also repaying our own investment, as contrasting the situation where they're purchasing all their own power, where they get all of the yield, but then that means there's no repayments on our own investment, which obviously has bad consequences for our prospects of doing that investment. It's quite a wordy question. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the very short answer to that is no. No, we haven't looked at such schemes. I mean, I fully understand what you've outlined, Chair, and in a sense, it mirrors a judgment that we're taking with the leisure estate. So the logic of sort of, we would sit down with the leisure provider in a couple of years' time and take a view. Can you get the energy cheaper, or can we? Well, whoever can get it cheaper, let's do that, because it helps everyone. We haven't done that with our commercial estate. I mean, obviously that's much more fragmented, and we're not in any sense decision makers about how they run their businesses, and nor I'm sure would we seek to be, but that is something that we could sort of look at. I mean, there are issues around reselling, because you use those terms. I mean, there are all sorts of license requirements to be an energy supplier, which I don't think the council would seek to want to try to do. But I think what you're describing could potentially be achieved in a slightly different way if one actually struck the lease in the first place to say we'll buy the energy. But so I understand the point, but I'm afraid no, we haven't looked at that.
Councillor Fry.
I would be very wary thinking, and you, the two Chris's and myself were on the finance panel. I'm going to report back on that. But I mean, thinking of the finance hub, there is risk associated. I mean, we know there was risk with leisure. I mean, and we're struggling through, and we'll get a new contractor. But I mean, I would hate it to be that we end up, if you like, underwriting the power supply to someone who then is unable to deliver from their side. Quite apart from, I know people who generate their own renewable electric power, there are barriers to them just offering it to their next door neighbours, because they would become energy sellers and would then, as Mish has said, be licensed under a separate regime. So I think this might be a step too far, at least with us as we are at present in financial terms.
Very well. I'll probably leave that one there, but I suspect there's an interesting conversation to be had on the topic some point in the future. Any more on this topic? I don't see any more hands, in which case, thank you very much indeed. And I suggest, well, I didn't hear anything that people would wish to put as recommendations. Anybody want to correct me on that? I don't think so. Right, yes, in which case, thank you for the discussion. No recommendations to be made from Scrutiny on that one. Let us move forwards to the LGA Corporate Peer Challenge. So this is the one where we once again have Councillor Turner, and we once again have Mish. So welcome back to both of you from your 5-second absence. Councillor Fry, sorry.
Sorry, are we therefore skipping items 6 and 7?
No, he's reordered them.
I suggest we come to those at the end. Let's get through all the reports and then do the. So yes, let's do all of the reports first, and then come to the admin at the end. We'll be faster at the admin for our desire to go and have dinner. Right, yes, LGA Peer Challenge. The cast of characters is unchanged. Councillor Turner, do you want to kick off on this one, or would you like to, Mish, to also kick off on this topic?
I might say a few words on this one, if I may. I mean, I didn't really add a lot of value to the last discussion, did I? So I'll give it a go. Give it a go here. I mean, a few sort of overarching reflections. I've seen people have read the report and are familiar with the recommendations. I don't think a lot would be achieved by going through blow by blow. A couple of reflections from my end. I mean, one is it had been a while since we'd had one of these. I was glad we did it. The panel were very good, very professional, really got under the skin of the council. little bit of nervousness in advance. I don't know if people followed it in local government press, but the LGA had done a peer review of Woking that gave it a rather better bill of health than it deserved, as things turned out a few weeks later. And so clearly they were going to look really hard at some areas, particularly around the financial robustness of the council, and also the visiting Section 151 officer from another authority was someone with a lot of experience and willing to bring some robust challenge, if I put it that way. So that was good. And I don't think I've ever read a peer review report as good as this one before. It was really, really positive, and lots of really helpful praise to take away, and that was really good. And a lot of it as well, I think we looked through it. It's some of it's stuff we take for granted, actually, as members, but it's good to be reminded just the breadth of work going on, the commitment to sustainability, a lot actually of the positive relationships between members and council officers, for example. That was really, really good. There are a few key points to take away from me. I mean, one, if people were to look at the main report and the executive summary, where it says the council has a good record of delivering against its financial strategies and budgets, good understanding of the council's financial position, the medium-term financial plan is broadly balanced. This is dependent on achieving forecasted returns from wholly owned companies, commercial income delivering savings. These mechanisms are notoriously difficult to deliver against budget and will require a sustained focus on monitoring and challenging actual positions through the years to guarantee a high rate of deliverability. I mean, that seems to me, absolutely on the money and something we're focused on. There are several hints throughout the report at a need to prioritise. And there are other points in the report where it's made clear that we will need to focus, I suppose, on being quite realistic about our budgets, the fact that the generation of income is going to be increasingly difficult as a means of offsetting savings. There's also some good commentary, I think, about the relationship with the companies and the alignment of companies with the council's business plan. I'd have been surprised if that wasn't in there. Because there's an inherent tension when a council sets up a wholly owned company between the company pursuing its own objectives in the short term and being aligned with the shareholder. But that also, I think, was on the money. So we're picking up these recommendations. We, I think, accept them and welcome them, just as we appreciate the positive comments. Be really interested in the reflections of Scrutiny on this tonight. Mish may have a bit more to say about any of this, but particularly around process and so on. And clearly this is something which Susan and Caroline are taking a very keen interest in, and Susan is the lead member. It's just she's not able to join us tonight. So I'll leave those general reflections there and pass the baton to Mish.
Thank you, Ed. So from a process point of view, I'd point to the 65 meetings that the LGA group held with 130 odd people. It really was a very sort of comprehensive exercise, and they went out on 2 tours around the city, going both city centre and what we're trying to do in the West End in particular, and then out to both Blackbird, Lees and Barton. They did visits. And within those visits, they met a lot of external stakeholders, both everyone from senior people at the university down through members of the public, community groups and so forth that we engage with. And so their findings are clearly informed by that collective view. They were very, very clear about that they triage everything that they put into the report, so that if they hear it just from one person or whatever, then unless they can get it validated by hearing it somewhere else, it doesn't go in. So that was their approach. In terms of what we do next, as Ed has highlighted, there are a number of recommendations, and we have already kicked off internally as officers action planning to address all of them. And the action plan will be brought to Cabinet in December for consideration. And of course, there is a sort of further follow-up inspection, or if inspection is the right word, meeting with the LGA team in the spring.
Brilliant. Thank you both for the intro. Can I see hands for people who've got questions? I see Councillor Diggins and Councillor Diggins only, so please go ahead.
I think first of all, just to say that this was really brilliant to hear, and it's really nice to hear all the things, as Councillor Turner said, being recognised in a report like this. I think two of the recommendations in particular sort of struck me, I guess. Obviously there were lots of brilliant things, but one of them was about communicating, for example, on the regeneration project, and the other one was about prioritisation. And I think both of those, they're not, I guess, simple fixes, and some of them speak to kind of wider ways of like the ways that councils work, and in some ways where, you know, our powers of, you know, we can run the world's best communications campaign, but that may not even solve the problem. And then some of it seems almost inherent in, I mean, I guess politics in a way is a game of prioritization. So I know that you're putting together an action plan, but I wondered how some of those kind of longer term or deeper things are playing into the action plan. I mean, I guess part of it will be to do with the communications team and how you do things in that way, but I wondered how those slightly more holistic recommendations are being considered holistically. But I guess that will be a question for the action planners again.
Do you want to take the responses in the first sentence, or?
I probably pass that one to Mish, actually. But I mean, you know, the point's well made and well taken, and I think the answer is, you know, yes, and agreed. A particular area I suppose I'm interested in is how we play this back into our budget process. Our budget process has always been a bit more than an exercise simply in financial planning. It's also an exercise in corporate planning. I think we will need to scrutinise quite carefully our capital programme, which is an area where our prioritisation hasn't always worked as well as it might be, as well as it might have done, something which the report has picked up. We need to make sure we don't put things in our budget where we're then we don't have the staff to deliver them. And there are also some other, you know, good reflections as well about the particular challenges around recruitment and retention, and about project management, which play into that as well. Just on the regeneration point, which is maybe a different one, of the communication. This is something which I've been cognizant of, and again, without going into the details, sometimes you will have a community of people with a regeneration scheme who are very, very engaged in the detail, and they will want to talk. They may have objections to what's going on in principle, or they may accept the principle but have some really good, very detailed feedback, or areas of challenge. And the temptation, I think, is in our communications that we slip into engaging a lot with the very interested people and trying to win arguments there, which we, you know, might or might not win. Some people won't be persuaded, but in doing so, we then miss out on communicating in a meaningful way with the 90% of people who aren't necessarily up close to the scheme, probably have other things going on in life, but where actually we ought also to be communicating effectively. But that's maybe a bit of a personal hobby horse. Mish may want to add something to the generality and around prioritisation.
Yes, prioritisation is something that we discuss a lot around the corporate management team table. It is challenging, and as Ed has highlighted, marrying how we sort of prioritise our capital programme, and indeed other sort of project work that the council is undertaking, alongside the requirements and stringencies of our budget, and particularly the sort of medium-term financial planning process, and also the corporate strategy. All these things have got to align. So we're kicking off a process now-ish around renewal of the 4-year council strategy, which will be needed to come into place for adoption next year. Here's an ideal opportunity that we sort of properly tackle these points around prioritisation, and that runs through and informs how we set the priorities over that next 4-year period. If I may, just very briefly on the regen one, since it concerns communications, which is one of my areas of responsibility. I actually wholly agreed with the view taken, and indeed, as Ed, I think, well characterised, we we can do, I think, quite a lot more to, in a sense, sell the benefits of the fantastic regen programs that are sort of going everywhere. And as the LGA teams put it, when they went to and had their tour around the West End and our projects on Ox Pens and what we're looking to sort of achieve with the railway station and so forth. Fantastic, they said. But then when they went and talked to people in Blackbird Leys, there was a, well, what does it mean to us question? And we need to help in terms of explaining what it means.
Thank you both. Any further questions, comments? Elsef, please.
I think I was one of the person who was interviewed on this, and we did talk quite a long on the diversity, and I was reading this Appendix 3. Yes, there are challenges and contradictions and some, but it always, I'm not sure why, but when we talk about the diversity and equality, we move things towards housing and a number of other things, very little talk about the minority groups and their involvement. So is there anybody had any comments on this?
And again, do you want to go first by default? Or?
I don't mind, but I think that, well, so sorry, was this also been recommended in response to a particular recommendation in the report? Sorry, which recommendation were you looking at, or which part of the report?
Appendix 3, when we're talking about a study template for the diversity case.
I think I can probably better explain. So as part of the LGA peer review process, the council was asked to submit 2 case studies on work that it had undertaken in recent times, things that we'd done and completed to submit so that they could be on the LGA's website as exemplars for other councils to look at. The 2 that we chose and were submitted, one was concerned the creation of the dynamic purchasing system for EVI infrastructure, which interestingly we're going to be talking about in not too great an amount of time, and which has won awards in procurement awards previously. And then the second one concerned the way in which we work together to compile the equality, diversity, inclusion strategy for the council, which again was a submission that went into national awards, and it didn't win, but it was one of the commended, so it got shortlisted, and we're proud of both pieces of work. I mean, they've both been externally recognised and so forth, and they appeared to be appropriate to put in and submit as our case studies.
Anybody else got questions? Sorry, yeah, Councillor Jarvis, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess a slightly odd question, but I guess it's a question about the language of the report. This is the first of these LGA peer review reports that I've read, and I guess throughout the report, it feels like the language is extremely measured, but there are a number of points in which there's reflections which are slightly critical of the, not critical, but provide some, I guess, warnings around the future of the Oxford model and the performance of companies. And it's hard the first time reading this to know how much of that is measured language because it's a very measured response, or how much of it is euphemistic. And actually there's more concern bleeding through there that we're supposed to be reading between the lines, especially given there's, a flurry of recommendations at the bottom, specifically on the companies in the Oxford model. So I guess it's a reading comprehension question in one way, but it'd be good to get a sense of your interpretation of that, and whether that is it is a measured reflection, or whether it's a slightly more euphemistic description of what's actually going on there.
If I may, I will jump in on that one, but I mean, Mish may want to comment as well. So in terms of language, I mean, yeah, you're right. There is a certain way of LGA writing about things, but if you were to pick up some of its other more critical reviews, then they do call a spade a spade. So I think I would take it at face value. And I think what they've identified is there are some ways in which the sustainability of the Oxford model as a means of generating increasing amounts of income will probably be called into question. And I think that's something I would agree with. Secondly, it is an area of risk, and any sensible person looking in at our council medium-term financial strategy would identify it as an area of risk, because we're very reliant on returns from our companies. Some of them are relatively a lower risk when we are building houses which we then buy. There are clearly significant planning risks, for example, risks around construction costs, but still there is a purchaser there. When ODS is providing services to the council, there's a low level of risk. When it comes from trading, the level of risk is higher. So there is a level of risk there, and I think that's it's right to point to that. And as I mentioned in my sort of opening spiel, the point about the alignment between companies and the council is always, it could never be other than an area of tension, and it would have been surprising if it didn't come up. But I think there's some good challenge there. So my reading of it is they're saying we have absolutely to focus on this, and we'd be daft not to, because of the importance to the council and because of the way it sort of weighs in our risk profile. There are some areas where we could do things better around clienting. I think that's fair, around alignment, and around benchmarking. I think that's fair. The other thing, Chris, which I sort of say on this, is we had an external review a while back by, I think, our internal auditors of the company arrangements as well, and specifically around the governance. And so that went into quite a lot of depth on this, and had quite a detailed look. And so I'd sort of read the LGA comments alongside that as well. It's going to be continued. I think they're not. This is not a panning in polite language, but it certainly picks up on the fact that it's an area of risk, and one which I think we have to acknowledge.
Thank you. So, Mr. you want to follow up? Or?
Very, very briefly, just perhaps worth highlighting that two of the LGA panel members have got sort of deep experience. So we had the finance director from Hounslow and the Section 151 and chief operating officer from Cornwall, both authorities which do quite a lot of this in wholly owned companies. And I think that the points, as Ed has said, were kind of measured in that respect, and with knowledge.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in with questions or comments? I'm not seeing any hands around the table, so I've got a couple of things. Recommendation 10. So you might have just glanced off this. But recommendation 10 talked about a desire for the council to strengthen its client arrangements. And I honestly had no idea what they're driving at there. What was your interpretation of the recommendation there? What are they asking of us?
I think it is what it says on the tin, but I read it particularly in relation to ODS, probably rather less to the housing company. And I think it's particularly about when we, for example, purchase repairs, we've got a clear or improvements to our homes, or any sort of works, that we have a clear sense of what we're buying, that we set clear parameters. If things are not going as we might expect, then that is escalated to the shareholder. That's the way I read it. Okay, interesting. And the second thing I was going to ask you about is they talked a bit about cooperation with neighbouring planning authorities, in which I think they're getting at the wake of Oxfordshire 2050 and housing numbers and so on. To take the sort of the usual political back and forth as read for a moment. Obviously, we had previously Oxfordshire 2050, which is a entirely cooperative attempt to draw up a plan. The current procedure, adversarial is probably a slightly too strong word, but you see what I mean. It's largely an approach in which the councils do their own thing and
the planning inspectorate / national government arbitrates between us, in effect. Did they have any particular suggestions there in terms of what they'd want to see? Were they just exhorting parties to try to resurrect Oxfordshire 2050? Did they have some sort of some other form of cooperation in mind they thought that the councils ought to explore? What were they getting at, or was it just a statement of regret about 2050?
I have no insights whatsoever to contribute there. I pass to Mish, but it possibly is a lament, and who knows? It might be that government policy in this goes full circle every so often. Who knows? Maybe regional, sub-regional planning will be resurrected at some point in the not too distant future.
Yes, I'd be inclined to agree. I mean, they saw with their own eyes what we were doing in terms of housing delivery, and that's commended in the report. It's one of the things that they said they were impressed by. So that's OX Place. But at the same time, they were well aware, and they did speak to leaders of some of our neighbouring councils. So they spoke to the leader of West and of Charwell, or maybe actually they spoke to the chief executive. Anyway, they spoke to some of our neighbours and got a sort of clearer, I think, understanding about the tensions that are there. And so, yes, I think to some extent that this is acknowledgement that what we're trying to do is challenging in the face of a lack of a 2050 plan, but that keep at it, and we wish you well, I think is the message.
Fair enough. Thank you both. Anybody else got any questions or comments? Not seeing any hands. Right, in that case, does anybody have any recommendations they'd wish to put forward on this report? Councillor Diggins,
please. It's not a recommendation, but will the scrutiny committee see the action plan? Yes, if it wants to. I recommend that we look at it, but that's a recommendation for scrutiny rather than the report.
On behalf of the absent chair and vice chair, I will obviously accept that recommendation in as binding way as possible. Anybody else have recommendations to venture? I don't see that there are, in which case, thank you both very much again. Councillor Turner is now free, but Mish is 3 for 3, is on the cast of characters for all 3 of our reports. Councillor Turner, thank you very much indeed for joining us. If you'd like to leave, then thank you.
The pleasure was mine, but good night.
Right, then let's move on to the third and final of the major reports on our agenda, which is the delivery of electric vehicle infrastructure. So this is where we do have a slight cast of characters change. So we retain Mish, but we gain Councillor Upton, who is standing in for Councillor Railton and also has partial, it sort of falls in the middle of their 2 remits in any case. And we're also joined by Tina Mould and by Sarah Hassenflug. Thank you both very much indeed for coming in person, which I think is often quite beneficial, I think, to these things. Right, okay, Councillor Upton, do you want, before we begin, let me just remind everybody that we have one appendix here, which is appendix number 6, which is confidential. If anybody wishes to ask any questions or in any other way talk about the content of appendix 6, we would need a confidential session to do that. If anybody has the desire to do that, then please flag the fact that that's the case before going to talk about any of that, and we'll do that as that's required. But certainly in the public session, Councillor Upton, please introduce the report if you would.
Thank you, Chris. So the delivery of electric vehicle infrastructure for Oxford paper. You're probably aware that we have been very successful in the past at getting government funding for this. Go Low is the fund, the Go Ultra Low money, and it means that we are literally streets ahead of our surrounding districts, having had a designated prize-winning team doing this for several years. We've done a lot of early pilots of different charging types, the lamp post, pop-up bollards and things. We've worked with 9 different suppliers. We've established the annual electric vehicle summit here in Oxford, out of which sprang the collaboration that delivered Europe's most powerful charging hub out at Redbridge, Park and Ride. And thanks to all of this industry, we do now already have about a quarter of the taxi fleet is electrified. We're about to get a whole large fleet of electric buses, and we have the highest level of take-up of electric vehicles by residents of any county in the UK. Now, back in July 2022, the City Council Cabinet did approve our own electric vehicle infrastructure strategy, the OXEVIS, which was Appendix 5. I just wanted to remind you a little bit of some of its overriding principles, which were about making sure that the rollout of this was fair and equitable. So to make sure that help was targeted to areas that were not going to be commercially viable and that would need to, have help from the council. We really want to support car clubs. We want to make sure there's provision for working driver charging. We want to be electrifying blue badge parking bays. We want to make sure there's charging facilities for tenants, whether that's private or public sector tenants. And also, absolutely crucially, I think the numbers in our EVIS strategy are designed to get us to net zero by 2040. So we were very much on top of our game here, I think. But the government produced a strategy document last year called Taking Charge, which shifts responsibility to tier 1 transport authorities, i.e. the county council. So this means that we do now need to combine forces with the county council for future bids for government funding. And that's what we are going to be doing for the next round of the local electric vehicle infrastructure grant, the LEVI grants, which will be being made to support both the county's EV structure and our own EVI structure. This comes with meaning that we're going to need to transfer ownership of some of our existing, all our existing on-street elements of the GULO project, and we're going to transition the delivery of the second phase of that. We're going to transition that over to the county council to do, assuming that the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles agrees that, and that we can get an agreement with them for a sort of fair revenue sharing, given that we have invested a lot of officer time in this first phase of GULO infrastructure, on the understanding that we would then be making money back from it later on. So while I have to say, I regret the fact that we're reducing our control over the rollout of this infrastructure and handing it over to the county, but that's the way the national picture is going. And we have got, I think our officers have done an incredible job at getting commitments out of them that when the county updates its own strategy, they are going to ensure that there'll be at least the equivalent or improved outcomes specified for the city compared to our existing OXEVIS commitments and implementation plan. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Would any of our officers like to add anything to the introduction, or shall we proceed straight into questions and comments?
I think perhaps a point worth making is that when we set out with the implementation in the early phases of putting EV infrastructure into the ground, this was very much test and learn stuff. This was small scale pilots. It wasn't sort of revenue raising for the council. Now, with the prospect of much larger scale implementation, but also, of course, with much more significant take-up of electric vehicles, as you go through into the future, you can see that the potential revenues that can flow through are much more significant. And as the report sort of highlights, over the sort of current 4-year budget period, we're talking about £24,000. But by the time you're getting through to the years 2029 to 2040, we're looking more at £5 million. So it's a different sort of way of looking at the importance of electric vehicle infrastructure to the council.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I see hands for people who wish to ask questions on this? I see Councillors Fry, Mundy and Jarvis. Let's have Councillor Mundy, since you haven't spoken yet.
Thanks very much. Is there anything protected in the report that we couldn't ask about in open session? I just want to double check before I ask any questions.
Appendix 6, but it's very brief.
Appendix 6. Okay, it's not about that. I just want to double check that because I heard
Appendix 6 in particular is it's getting into the numbers and cost projections.
Yeah.
So unless this is a numerical question, you're quite likely to steer clear of it.
Yeah, cool. I just thought I'd double check just before. So firstly, my understanding is that rural locations and urban locations in deprived areas are going to be sort of biggest focus for new EV infrastructure. And obviously here in Oxford, we have more of the latter than the former. So, how confident are we that the County Council as the Tier 1 authority is going to be affording an appropriate priority to the areas that we in the city would like them to be focusing on, which is the more deprived urban areas, and obviously balancing that with obviously the interests of districts that are more rural. And I've got a second question, Chair. So actually, a few weeks ago, I actually rented an electric vehicle, which I'd never done before. And I was actually quite shocked at how expensive the electricity was. So it really, ended up costing more or less the same as a fuel car. So these ultra fast charging points were quite expensive. So is it the case that pretty much the faster the electricity is coming out, the more expensive it's going to be? And if that is the case, is there a sort of sweet spot in terms of a usable power point for people, for people to charge the vehicle and still get value for money for people renting vehicles and charging their own vehicle, so that, we're going to obviously ensure that we're encouraging EV car usage rather than putting people off by shocking them with how expensive the electricity ends up being? Thank you.
So shall I I'll do my best to answer the first question. So we are working very closely with the County Council and our neighbouring districts. The main context for Levi funding is to meet on-street need. So we will have total control over our own car parks and they will have control over the highway. So we will be able to deploy in our car parks where we own the land, and they will be able to deploy on the highway under their remit. The focus is definitely on the on-street element. So where there is a deprivation, where there's a very high on-street need, they will be treated just the same as somewhere that's in a more affluent area. So they will be treated the same. And in fact, we will be working really closely with them, and we're focusing on doing the best that we can to ensure that deprivation is considered quite high in all the context of the ways that we work through how the grant is expended. And there's things like a demand tracker. So we already have a demand tracker for Oxford, which is now a county-wide demand tracker. So all of those things are taken into consideration when EV charging is basically deployed. And the commercials around the business case that we're all working on, which aren't finalised yet, but are really trying to work out where the grant is deployed, where currently the business case is more difficult to sort of make work at the moment. So that's the idea of really where the grant should go, if that helps to answer that question. But it's a work in progress. The bid hasn't been submitted and we're still working through everything. So it's not all finalised.
So in regards to the second question, I think it's a tentative yes. So faster energy tends to be more expensive, but there's a more fundamental difference between energy that's taken from a home charger and energy taken from a public charger. There's some tax implications behind it because VAT is charged at a very different level. And there's an implication of charging time, so that at home people can charge at night. There's some very, very good tariffs out there, very cheap energy prices. And that's one of those kind of inequities that are kind of built in when you look at this at the whole city level or whole county level, that there will be groups of people that can access those home chargers and there's other groups that cannot. And so one of the reasons why there is a strategy and why we're involved is to see kind of what balancing we can do. So for example, the Gully project which originated in Gulo and is now being taken forward kind of and scaled up with ODS as a lead part of the county council that enables people that otherwise would not be able to access cheap home charging to access cheap home charging. So there's all sorts of mechanisms in there to seek to balance this. But like everything else, the EVI sector is impacted by the energy prices. The prices are substantially higher now than they used to be. And we're then looking at contracts that are structured in a manner that allow kind of the prices to come down when the energy prices, the wholesale costs come down. But it's, you know, it's a commercial contract. So we have some influence, but not total control.
Thank you all. Councillor Fry, your questions, please.
Thank you very much. I imagine the two officers, Tina and Sarah, must have groaned when they heard this is restricted to tier 1 authorities. I mean, since you were pioneers in this, I mean, one of the things which I remember when we read about some of the ODS initiatives, they're actually trying to market their Gulo, e-Gulo systems to other areas. I know they're test marketing, piloting them. So I just wonder, first of all, is this requirement that it's tier 1, at least in local terms, going to restrict ODS's ability to take this forward? And one thing I'm not quite sure about, this is all seems to be posited in terms of grant funding and where it will go. My guess is, at least it depends who you speak to, but there are quite a few residents in houses where they have no front drive, they have no easy access to the street, who would love Gulos. And I just wonder whether quite separately, there is a private commercial case, maybe via ODS, for proceeding with Gulos outside government grants. That's one. The other thing which I know I've raised in the past, which is a county issue really. If you have a street of terraced houses where people have Gulos, and you have one and so on,
do you mean gullies, by the way?
Your own, sorry?
This is all about gullies, right? Just to get the terminology right.
Yeah.
This is the street crossing.
Yes, the street crossing. The people would presumably like to charge their own vehicles from their own electric power. They have the option to do it at night or whatever. Is there any discussion, serious discussion with highways of trying to work out a scheme to make the licensing costs simple, to have dedicated parking spots on highways? Maybe you have to do it by groups of houses neighboring one another to bring down the costs and the hassle of being able to charge your own car when you don't have a front drive. Without that, I feel some of the advantages will not be achieved. Now, that's not you, that's the county that needs to be cooperative. So those were my questions. Thank you.
Shall I do answer one? So I don't.
Can you just, sorry, before you begin, if you push the unused unit away from you, that'll stop the ringing feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that tip, that's really handy. I don't think that the passing of the tier 1 responsibility is going to have a massive impact on ODS. So we are working closely together, and I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference at the end of the term of this contract. Almost everybody will be driving an EV. A lot of the risk will have gone in terms of the kind of business case, and it's an ideal opportunity at that point for potentially the council to become an owner operator. So, and I think we've got a lot of opportunity in between that to sort of get to that point with ODS, and we have some plans in place that we're working on that may enable them to sort of deliver a few of the car parks as well. So yeah, so I think, yeah, so I'm not worried about that. In terms of the gully and the grant, I think there's £700,000 grant given to the county council for gullies at the moment, of which I think we've got, how many in Oxford? Sarah, is it 200?
We have no specific number, but kind of
roughly.
indicative modelling would have been around 200. Yeah, but I think it's really important to say that the funding is to effectively get the kind of the licensing and kind of all those surrounding kind of regulatory infrastructure in place, so that then this can be scaled out to the market. And it is very much designed under the ODS model as a self-funded kind of a household funded option, with some funding contribution and grant contribution at the early stages to offset some of the planning cost, and potentially kind of some additional support for those that are mobility impaired. And the county council is looking at a separate project, kind of also using the GULIs to target that particular group. But I would very much advise to kind of, in a sense, to liaise with the county on this. They're working on this strand quite intensely.
Just to answer the last bit, I think we're still relatively early days, because we are trying to work through this to make it a business as usual methodology that anybody who owns a property can basically apply for and see if they're going to be eligible for one. So if there's any constraints on the highway, or their car parking, or they can't easily access the road, or there's a tree nearby or something that's going to block what they're doing, then I think this will be a totally viable opportunity basically going forward for most people. So, or for many people anyway.
Thank you all. James, unless you have any follow-ups, then Councillor Jarvis, your questions.
It's just a quick one, really. So reading the papers, I think there's a lot in there around car parks, and there's a lot in there around car clubs. Unless I'm mistaken, there isn't anything in there about the two together in terms of, so I guess the question I have really is, in terms of infrastructure, one of the opportunities I guess the council has is utilising its car parks for dedicated car club spaces with charging infrastructure. And so I guess the question is, A, whether I've missed that in the papers, but if not, B, why that's absent from the infrastructure plan.
So shall I answer that one? We are looking at introducing a car club where we can in every car park. So per number of EV bays that we deploy in some car parks where it's only possible to maybe put a couple of EV bays in, or there's very constrained car parking, then we may not always be able to put a car club in there. But in most of the car parks that we're looking to deploy EV charging, we will look to have a car club in there as well. We just need to work through the best methodology for making sure that we get best value for that car club, and that it's suitable for the public. I think we do it in a fair process. So we're working on that as well.
Cool. Councillor Merriman, please.
Thank you, and congratulations on all your awards, and thank you for all your great work on this. As well as on-street parking and charging on on-street and in car parks, is there another third place which is working with private companies who have new developments? I informally am working with a development on the Botley Road to encourage them, and they've informally agreed, to allow the public to charge their EVs at their EV charging outside of work hours. And I'm just wondering whether is there a potential there to work with planning so that that becomes a planning requirement for any new developments with workplace parking, that those EV charging places should be available to the public outside of work hours. What are your thoughts on that?
So as part of there's a number of things I was just going to allude to. As part of the Levi tender, there's three elements. There's the on-street, there's car parks, and there's micro hubs. So there's opportunities in Oxford for communities and social enterprises to come forward with locations where EV charging can be situated. And there's going to be some grants available to be spent on that. So basically the county will pay for the EV charging to go in up front, and then the people that own that land will then have to take that charging infrastructure on in the longer term. And quite a few localities in Oxford have come forward, as well as some schools. So we're really positive about all of that. So that's one element. In new developments, the building regulations have kind of come in generically, which enforce EV charging to come in, to be put in situ anyway when new developments are created, whether that's residential, also some commercial. So that's really positive. We are looking at landlord or third-party landlord opportunities as well. So where we can use maybe the contracting terms we're doing to deploy EV infrastructure on other people's land. So we're looking at that as a sort of potentially whether we can do some kind of back-to-back agreements. So yes, we'd be interested, but whether planning, we just need to work through all of that. So it's work, I don't know whether Sarah's got anything else to add into that.
Only that kind of, so the building regs kind of cover kind of that there will be charges. Is kind of how if they will be shared. I think kind of that's an additional point. What is very much kind of in scope kind of for the implementation plan is the principle of co-charging, which is households sharing their driveway, workplaces sharing their driveways. There is now kind of a really good community of kind of, it's effectively kind of a set of apps, whether that's ZapMap or co-charge, that are facilitating this sort of kind of endeavor, and it's very much within the scope of the implementation plan to look at how we can maximize co-charging, because that also enables cheap access at the times where demand on the grid is low. So it's in scope. There's something to be fleshed out how exactly this looks like when we actually do go ahead with it.
Councillor Dickinson.
I'm going to apologise because this probably is, I'm latching onto some things some other councillors have said, and it's a little bit outside scope, but as we're talking about planning and things, I think in terms of getting coverage across Oxford, this is obviously because of the area I represent, but I think a big problem is, well, not a problem, but conservation areas present a particular challenge when it comes to EV charging. And I know that on street is an option, but in a place where places like a lot of places in the centre of Oxford where parking's already constrained, I think there are some particular problems which might need to be worked out around things like gullies, where you might have protected street gullies, which obviously makes sense in certain places, but at the same time is going to be a challenge when it comes to things like this. And I wondered if there was any joined up working going on about how we can make sure there's even coverage in terms of sort of conservation area things as well. Sorry, I'm very pro the conservation area. It's just, I think that when it comes to this, I think that some joined up thinking maybe needs to happen.
So, I mean, again, it's something that is in scope, and it's kind of it's very much acknowledged as one of those challenge areas that we need to look at. There has been joint working with the kind of the planning colleagues kind of on a heritage stand that looked at kind of EV installations, whether they are kind of public ones, kind of so having lamppost charging, for example, which is not so intrusive, or the cable gullies, which are kind of very discreet, and just considering kind of what is appropriate in which setting. We've also worked with the planning portal to kind of provide some generic guidance. We've been kind of inputted into that, and just kind of to set out the considerations that kind of households may want to make kind of when they do apply for planning permissions for infrastructure, if they want to install something themselves, to just provide some generic input. So yeah, again, it's in scope. It's a known concern, and will be considered under the work packages.
Any more for any more? All right, in that case, I've got a few, not too many. First of all, on repair. So certainly one of the more frustrating aspects of the on-street charge points we've had so far is their tendency to break and then remain broken for 6 to, I think in the worst, 6 months to, in the worst case, I think it was 3.5 years. One of them remained broken. I think that was due to an acquisition followed by obsolescence of the specific unit and yada, yada, yada. You see how this goes. My sort of interpretation of what's been happening is one where these are devices which very slowly trickle money into their bank account, and that when they break, it becomes a dead loss to spend money going out there repairing it, or indeed removing it if that's the best that can be done. And it's in their interest to simply abandon it at that point. Oh well, it didn't work. What can we do in terms of incentives there, in terms of a material cost to the contractor for leaving something in a broken state, or just leaving something which is no longer needed, that hasn't been removed, which has often been the case?
So we're working with the contracts we're going to have are generic contracts across the district. So we'll have our own contract signed, but we have to agree all the terms together when we're going through everything. So we're looking at liquidated damages and trying to see what we can do to tighten up the existing contracts that we've got. I mean, we've learned a lot as we've gone on, and our contracts have got better and better. They're not perfect, and legislation and litigation is always quite difficult and time consuming, but we're doing our best to make sure that the future contracts are as tight as possible.
Could you say what liquidated damages means? Sorry.
So where possible, so recovering finance that for losses that due to the fault of the kind of the contractor, basically. So, but it has to be losses that we can justify. So you have to prove that that's a damage or a loss to you.
So that sounds like something which would happen if one burst into flames and damaged something or something of that sort, but probably not if it was just out of order and remained that way for a while. Like, it's hard to point at somebody who's lost something there, except I suppose a person would arrive at it, go, and then drive on and spend a bit of time.
And also lost revenue for us potentially as a local authority. I also think that if we think about it going forward, the tenders that go out, they'll potentially be, we'll start off with maybe 1,000 charge points across all of Oxfordshire. We'll be split between a number of contractors. So the kind of end game is a much bigger end game to the charge point operators we're dealing with as well. So they've got a lot more skin in the game from this from Netwall going forward. They will do so, and they're going to have a number of districts they're dealing with. So the collective weight of all of us and the kind of response we need and the key performance indicators and what our expectations are, and we'll be having monthly meetings with them. There's a lot of work we're doing just to make sure that we can make, have that really good delivery. And we've also increased our contract performance hugely, I think, recently. I mean, we've gone by being really on it. We've changed the way that we deal with people. So we're really on it, and we have weekly meetings with them if we need to. And we're holding them to task. We're asking for all their information. So we've changed the way that we deal with it as well, which has had a massive improvement from our end, I think. Go on, sorry.
And I was just going to because this is still a very fairly new market, there is a lot of chopping and changing amongst the charge point operators. So I mentioned that they'd worked with 9. Of those, did 2 go bust and 2 others were taken over by somebody else who didn't honour the existing contracts and things. So it has been very challenging to try and get things repaired when they have gone wrong in some cases.
Just maybe just kind of 2 points to add. Kind of one is to really emphasize that kind of the original Gulo estate kind of was very early stages. So we were looking at kind of assets that were kind of first and second generation of charging assets. So the technology has moved on a lot, which kind of makes it, it's modular now, kind of so parts can be repaired individually. So kind of there's going to be an improvement purely on the basis that the assets that we're dealing with will be different. And then also kind of because we're now kind of scaling this across the county and handing it over to the highways authorities effectively, there's going to be kind of a much larger apparatus that sits behind kind of this piece of work. So kind of from something which is quite tailored and hand-sewn, kind of moving into kind of a much more professional environment as well, where these things will be addressed at scale through much more robust contracts.
On what sort of a related note, a second thing I was going to ask about was the concession model, and specifically having several companies in competition acting as rival concessions. Now, obviously, I take the points about it's obviously good not to have a single point of failure. It's like competition can be beneficial in terms of ensuring there's no price gouging going on. These things are all to be desired. The one thing that springs to mind is who remembers the dockless bikes from before COVID, where it seemed a little bit like what took place there was vigorous price competition, which led to their having razor-thin operating margins, which in turn led to them having very little resource to spend in terms of customer support, in terms of repair. So they weren't, retrieving the bikes. They weren't repairing the bikes. They were largely just sort of put out there and then left to their own devices. Is there a risk that that you get the negative side of competition, that the margins do become really razor thin? And is there anything could be guarded against that? We noted that we can't set price controls. Can we set a minimum price so that you don't get the opposite of gouging, where companies really are unable to provide the service because their margins are so thin in that circumstance?
I'll ask my colleagues who are much more knowledgeable on the detail to come in a second, but just on the sort of the high level point, I think that actually yes, we all enjoyed the 3 different bikes to trip over on the pavements. That was the start of a market, which interestingly, of course, has now more or less disappeared. That you can, of course, still hire push bikes, but if there was an analogy, that's probably with the early stages of what we were piloting with EV infrastructure. As colleagues have explained, we're now getting to a scale point where there's real money, bigger operators and bigger returns here. So I think that whilst yes, there would be, competition will inevitably over time lead to some organisations going bust. It isn't, I think, as big a risk when you get to the sort of scale that we're looking at, and this is, as has been highlighted, county-wide.
Cool. Thank you. And one last thing I was going to ask about is planning. At the rates we're intending to go, we'd probably be looking at thousands of planning applications per annum. If the rollout proceeds as fast as we're hoping for. Obviously it might not, but there's certainly the potential to be looking at thousands of planning applications per annum. Is there a role here for local development orders or something of that form that tries to sort of push the problem in the other direction and try to sort of take decisions up front and provide this sort of twin of permitted development via measures like an LDO?
So I mean, I think first of all, it's important to say that kind of quite a lot of the infrastructure falls already under permitted development. And there are certain circumstances where that's not the case. The gullies are a case in point because they do not, their home charger does not fall under permitted development. The gully itself does, and we've been engaging the government on this for quite a while, so they're very aware of the issue. So far, they haven't kind of made any changes, but there is an acknowledgement kind of this fact. Similarly with the public charges, kind of most of them kind of will fall under permitted development. So we're engaging the planning department to make sure that we deliver them in the best possible way. But it's unlikely that that's going to be a major hold up, and kind of EVI is considered under the new local plan as a general principle. So if there is an area kind of where this would become a major bottleneck, then through that process, this could be raised and potentially addressed.
So the home charger is a good example there, I think, in that yes, we can lobby central government to make them PD, but we can potentially also use an LDO ourselves in order to proactively push out permission for such a thing. I appreciate it's not the perfect instrument. I'm interested to know whether it's under consideration. That's all.
I mean, it's probably a conversation to spin out because it goes then quite into depth, but we did actually look at that as one of the options. So we did an options appraisal and look at the different options on how we can address the planning constraints within the system. So we're very happy to share kind of what the work that we've done on that.
Cool. Thank you all very much. Are there any more on this item? Councillor Fry.
Well, I'd quite like to make a recommendation. I mean, I must say it's fascinating and it's good paper. I'm very grateful for it. I mean, I really feel if the Tier 1 authority is taking greater charge over this, I would like us to recommend that this whole question which I mentioned about parking and ability for people to charge from their own houses using a gully is taken into account, because what I understand from anecdotal evidence is for one person to apply for a dedicated parking space is actually a big hassle. And I think there are costs as well. I mean, I feel if this is to be rolled out as we hope, and there are lots of parts of the city, you represent some of them, where, and so does Lizzie, where you just don't have front drives or anything. You have to go across the pavement. I would just love to know that they have given serious consideration to facilitating it. I mean, that's what I would like as a recommendation for the Tier 1 authority to take this as a priority.
So is the recommendation specifically about parking reservation?
Parking in relation to, so yes, charge, this charging from governments.
It's just probably worth kind of adding one point. So in the second Gully trial, which was kind of led by County Council, kind of then jointly with ODS, and kind of we were inputting into it, we looked very closely at kind of how kind of under real world conditions these goodies are being used, and certainly kind of in the parking zones, it was not kind of a major issue at all. So we found that kind of if you look at public charging generically, kind of you have about kind of 95% of the charging people do at home, and then the rest is done on public chargers. Kind of for the Gullies, it's an 80-20% split. So 80% of the charging was done at home, 20% on public chargers. So it gives an idea how relatively easy it is for people to access these Gullies. And they found that it was acceptable to them to, on the occasion where they couldn't access the charger, where they needed it to go to a public provision that we then, of course, also in the wider ecosystem provide. So I think I would say putting a dedicated bay in specific circumstances, for blue badge holders, for example, absolutely is the right thing to do. I think on a generic level, there would then maybe be concerns that you're effectively privatizing the pedestrian pathways, and so far the evidence shows that it's not necessary, and of course that will continue to be monitored going forward.
Are you satisfied, or do you wish to?
I have had this raised by several people as a concern, and what they would like is, among neighbours, cooperating neighbours, that they would agree. I mean, the key issue is whose electricity is doing the charging, and where do you leave your car? As you get more and more people with EVs, which they're charging from home, where you do not have any front drive or whatever, I think this is likely to be an issue, and you could well imagine they could make it easier by having a communal parking space. They already have CPZs just to make this work better. I mean, I would quite like this to be flagged as an issue.
How about then, in terms of making this into a recommendation, it would look like working with county colleagues to assess the need that exists for, or the degree of need that exists for parking spot reservation to use a gully to charge from your home. Does that sound about right? And of course, hopefully the answer might turn out to be, as you say, that it is less necessary than we fear, in which case, fantastic. Yes, in the all EV future, it sounds like it would actually become slightly more difficult, right? As you have a sort of street full of people, all of whom are one gully away from where they need to be, or something of that sort. You're going to start to need gullies with 100-meter long cables to run down the gutter to where your car is. But we shall see. Councillor Dickens, please.
Yeah, just to add on from that, maybe this is a separate recommendation, but I think I agree with Councillor Fry that I appreciate it's really complicated, and I can see all the issues, and the issues of potentially privatising the pavement, which is obviously something we want to avoid. So I appreciate it's really sensitive, but maybe there's something about kind of looking when we're collecting, I appreciate it's difficult, but collecting the data of that 80-20% split, looking on a more localised basis, because I am aware that there are particular issues, for example, in my ward, with people finding parking spaces, and it is something, this is exactly the issue that Councillor Fry raises, is something that comes up on the doorstep very frequently, but I imagine it might not be such an issue in a different area of the city. So I wonder if we could think about sort of neighbourhood-based evaluate, I don't know how we'd phrase it, but something about looking at sort of the particular problems, and I think something about the conservation areas or particular things that are, or places that have higher concentrations of flats, for example. That's going to be a whole different set of considerations. So I wonder if we could think about sort of neighbourhood, or even whether that's neighbourhood based or ward based, looking at it in that way. But then again, I haven't phrased that in a particularly nice way.
Can it merge in perhaps to James's recommendation to look something like ... and look to gather user feedback concerning the degree of difficulty that has been experienced in practice? Does that sound about right? Or...
Yeah, I think the key thing is based in different areas, because I think different areas will based on their sort of not demographic, but they're like built area demographic, I guess, will
sure.
face different.
Especially in areas of highest parking pressure?
Yeah, highest parking pressure, but also types of building, presence of driveways, etc., the list goes on.
Semicolon and other relevant factors. Excellent. We'll, workshop the phrasing on that one. But I think the relevant points have come across. Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to put a recommendation forwards on this one at all? I would like to try to come up with a phrasing around the sort of repair and downtime matter. I'm not sure if we have a concrete key result on this already, but the recommendation would be around, again, obviously working with county colleagues to ensure that incentives to concession, was it the phrase was concessionaires, which I hadn't seen before, one who takes a concession, I suppose, that the incentives for concessionaires point in the direction of prompt repair when a unit is out of service, or disposal if a unit is irreversibly out of service. I think that's probably it, really. Just trying to ensure the financial incentives point in the direction of the behaviour we want there, basically, and that there is a measured outcome regarding downtime. I think that might already be there, though. If anyone could confirm, that is already there. Fantastic. Okay. In which case, it's just about the incentives.
Could we please also add a recommendation about requesting that we consider a small pilot on the shared use of charging, what I was saying before, on the shared use of EV charging points between employment and public on employment sites.
Yes, please.
We maybe make that like explore the viability of, because I think sort of proposing a pilot of it through scrutiny might be a bit, I don't know, maybe we're slightly overreaching our powers there, but
I'm sure they're, yes, not going to just march out of here and enact policy on the basis of scrutiny's utterances, much as we might like it.
Investigate the possibility.
Yes.
That would be fine, yeah.
Although, well, I wasn't completely clear from earlier of it. So there was talk about micro hubs, and that sounded like that centered around sort of community assets, things like community centers, village halls, things of that variety. Is there already language in there around employers, or are there purely private operators who have car parks and things of that sort, and potential sharing of those with residents?
So it's sort of in our implementation plan, I believe, or in our wider strategy, that we would look at any opportunities to share EV charging infrastructure between employers and the public. So as you said, so if it can be used by employers during the day and by the public at night, then that's sort of one of the key things that we're looking to do. Because the better the business case, the better it is for everybody, really. So the more utilisation you get, the better it is. So yeah.
Are you satisfied with that wording? Is there anything you'd wish to add in a recommendation? Or?
So that's already in there. In which case,
I think it's in there, but it's something we've definitely discussed, and it's something that's the free fall of our mind. I'd have to go through everything, look through every wording, but every bit of wording. But if you want to put it in there, we can double check. So
yes,
I can't remember.
If it's a 50-50, I suggest let's set it down, and then ideally the response is it's already there. Go and have a look at paragraph 22, and we will. All right, excellent. Are we clear enough on the wording on that one?
Yeah, so that.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. So we have 3 recommendations there. Any more for any more? I'm not seeing any hands waving, in which case I suggest that we're done. Thank you all very much indeed for the discussion, for attending. Yes, thank you all for coming. Right, but the rest of us don't get to escape just yet. Councillor Fry escapes anyway. He can't be stopped. I suggest we should proceed. Admin business, we've got the work plan and the forward plan to look at. Alice, do you mind talking to that one, please?
Thank you. So the work plan and the forward plan are included in the agenda pack. Members will note that the local plan item is listed on the forward plan summary for October Cabinet. This item, along with the still charging schedule partial review report, will be considered at the extraordinary informal remote meeting on Monday next week, ahead of Cabinet on the 18th. There's also been some slippage of other reports, which has reduced some of the pressure on the agenda for November scrutiny, which was discussed at the last meeting. So as it stands for November, we've currently got 3 Cabinet items listed on the work plan, which is the grant allocations to community and voluntary organisations. It is the equalities update and then the central conservation area appraisal. In addition, another item has recently come onto the forward plan, which isn't included in your packs, which is the Future Fit Oxfordshire project grant funding bid. That relates to a 5.28 million collaborative project to accelerate retrofit and transition to smarter retrofit using potential external funding from Innovate UK. It's recommended that this is added as a 4th report to the November scrutiny agenda, as there are no panel meetings that could feasibly go to in that time period. Then for the December meeting, there's 4 reports listed on there. That's the LGA peer review action plan, which was the feedback report was discussed earlier, the authority monitoring reports and infrastructure funding statement 22-23, which is an annual report scrutiny, the Oxfordshire Food Strategy Action Plan and the leisure management contract. There's also a number of items on the forward plan which are going to panel meetings, and again that's set out in your agenda packs. And then for the January meeting, we currently have 3 items for scrutiny, which is Thriving Community Strategy Update, the joint venture LLP for South Oxford Science Village, and the development of a sustainable building control service. This all assumes no slippage, and if there is slippage, changes will come to committee where possible or will be agreed by myself in consultation with the chair if not. And then also just to update on a couple of scrutiny commissioned items since the committee last met. The DAHA Accreditation and Domestic Abuse Review Group update is scheduled to come to the January meeting, and then adult exploitation to February. As always, should any members of the committee have any further suggestions for scrutiny commission work for this year that they haven't raised already, please let me know either now or via email so that these can be explored. The committee is recommended to confirm the work plan as set out in the agenda pack, with the addition of the Future Fit report to November scrutiny as suggested, and with any other amendments following discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are people content? Are you content to consent to the recommendations that were present there? I see nods around there. Councillor Fry. Oh, that was a hand. Sorry, I thought you were going to make counter recommendations. Right, excellent. Thank you all. And then the last bit of admin that we've got is about reports back. So the agenda, the report pack has responses back from Cabinet concerning the burial space, concerning the youth hub in Lees, concerning the smoke control area, and concerning HRA energy efficiency projects. Councillor Fry, would you like to report back on the finance and performance panel meeting?
Thank you very much. I was poised long ago, but I must thank Alice in particular for doing some very helpful notes. Otherwise, I would have forgotten. I mean, it was just the 2 Chris's and myself as chair. It makes it very easy. Everyone is Chris. We had Councillor Turner, Ed Turner, which was very helpful. And it's the same as the budget panel in composition. So we're going to be very, very busy actually as we come towards the new year and into January. We considered 3 substantive reports, which are the normal ones, which were on integrated performance, treasury management. This was an annual report actually, and scrutiny performance monitoring. And they're always valuable and good discussions. We didn't actually make any specific recommendations, but among the highlights from the discussion, it's clear that the single biggest budget challenge is temporary accommodation costs. We know that's a big item as we go into the budget panel. And then we've discussed already utilities, the pressure around those, and then the pay negotiations, which will feature in the medium-term financial strategy, and those are all risk-related. There are various things, obviously, that the government, central government, can facilitate, make our life easier. We did ask for a report to understand what the implications are of these Section 114 statements, which have been issued, as we know, by lots of local authorities. And we want to get a sense as to how Oxford and Oxford companies relate to some of the highly speculative investments made by these other councils. So we will get a report back on that. We have some items specifically about Treasury management, which relate to confidential items, but they will be there for us to track in future. And the other thing is on performance, scrutiny performance monitoring. You know, we have some key performance indicators, and the targets are given tend to be proposed by the people being monitored. We are interested, and we've asked to have more input into how those targets are determined, and make them in some cases more quantifiable, more relevant, to know what on earth they mean. And so there will be feedback on that. Our next meeting is in early December, following which it's hell on wheels with the budget, with some of us are on audit as well. We're going to have something like 6 meetings within more or less a month. So I wish us all well at that time, but thank you.
Budget to be hell on wheels, says Labour councillor, something like that. Tomorrow's Oxford Mail, I'm sure. Right, next up, we've got Climate and Environment, who met on September the 12th, but the chair is also the chair. So Alice, would you like to report back on that one?
Thank you. Yeah, so the panel met on the 12th of September and considered a number of reports. The HRA Energy Efficiency Projects 23-24, the Citywide Smoke Control Area Declaration, a Scrutiny commissioned item on air pollution, the Net Zero Master Plan and the Work Plan. Discussion was quite wide-ranging and it culminated in the formulation of 6 recommendations to Cabinet, 2 on the HRA report, 2 on the Smoke Control Area report and 2 on the air pollution item. The recommendations on the HRA and Smoke Control Area reports were all agreed by Cabinet in September, and the 2 on the air pollution item will be submitted to Cabinet in October for response. The HRA recommendations were around procurement options and the establishment of medium to long-term relationships with suppliers, and the other recommendation around the council setting a timetable for achieving a full complement of EPCs for its HRA properties. The smoke control area was around recommendation around ensuring clear messaging in the publicity campaign that more vessels are exempt from the smoke control area and why. And the other recommendation around the council working with the various boating communities to identify and address barriers to them adopting cleaner fuel types and exploring grant funding to support that work. And for the air pollution item, the recommendations were around the production of an accessible 1-page executive summary to sit alongside the rather technical annual air quality status report in future years, and also the council identifying and promoting the broader benefits of action to improve air quality. And then on the Net Zero Master Plan, the panel held a discussion about how it might best add value to ensure constructive scrutiny of that document. And it also agreed a number of scrutiny commissioned items on the work plan on tree planting and maintenance, energy generation and solar potential on council buildings and retrofit. And it will next meet at the end of November.
Thank you very much. And finally, housing and homelessness.
Thank you. So housing and homelessness met on the Thursday, the 5th of October. So was that only last week? And we discussed 2 reports. One of them was brilliant because it was on Housing First, and we had representatives from St Mungo's and A2 Dominion who provide the wraparound support that supports Housing First. And we had a brilliant discussion with everyone, including officers, about how the service users are supported and how the project is going to grow going forward, and also how what the success rate is as it stands. We didn't actually make recommendations on either of the items. The second item was on the Housing Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code self-assessment, but looks like the council is already almost completely compliant on all of those things anyway. And one of the things that we ticked off was discussing it as a council committee was one of our only outstanding actions. But it was just wanted to reiterate how great it was to have the have such a range of people to discuss Housing First and hear how it was going. And we meet again in early December.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed all. Any comments or questions on any of that? If not, then I would ask us to note the date of our own next meeting is unusually next Monday, and that is an online meeting, and that, so to consider the local plan 2040, and especially that the quorum is 4, and the quorum is a little bit shaky on the grounds of the fact that it has been organised at the last minute to fit in with the schedule and so on. So if you find yourself unexpectedly unable to make it next Monday, shout sooner rather than later, because it may be necessary to cajole or find substitutes or things like that. I shall certainly be there, so that's 3. Yes, indeed, yes, online next Monday, and then we then have regular scrutiny, I believe, early November, is that right?
The
6th of November, remember. Excellent. All right, in that case, that should be that. Thank you all very much indeed for coming this evening, and see you next time, but out of the chair this time.